on this Monday night.
It is shocking for me to see that somebody at the age of 93 years old died, when it's cold.
Locked out of her residence in the bitter cold, Gilles Duceppe's elderly mother succumbs to hypothermia. Now investigators are asking, how could something like this happen?
He was using his authority for his sexual gratification.
They were expecting routine medical exams. Instead, these women say they were violated, assaulted by an RCMP doctor.
I want justice. I want him to be charged.
And that the force covered it up. A CBC News investigation.
And are you getting enough rest?
60% of Canadians don't get the sleep that they need or the sleep that they want.
The toll it can take on your body, your mind, and your memory. An in-depth look at the science of sleep. This is The National.
We begin tonight in Montreal, where the extreme cold so many of us have been living through has cost a 93-year-old woman her life. Hélène Rowley-Hutt, the mother of Bloc Québécois leader Gilles Duceppe, was awakened in her seniors' residence by an alarm. So she bundled up a bit against temperatures that felt like minus 32 at the time. As Alison Northcott tells us, she didn't make it back in.
It was bitterly cold Sunday when an alarm went off at this private seniors complex around 4 a.m.
Well, I heard the alarm that the bell rang 4 times and stopped suddenly. And I looked at the window and I saw the firemen, about 4 or 5 car of firemen, people.
Some residents left their apartments, including 93-year-old Hélène Rowley-Hutt. Police say she was hard of hearing and may not have heard an announcement saying her building was not being evacuated. 7 hours later, her body was found outside in the snow.
Oui, je trouve ça effrayant.
I find it frightening, says this woman who lives nearby, that someone could have been outside without anyone noticing.
Ils m'ont expliqué qu'il y avait la monoxyde de carbone.
This resident says firefighters explained there was a problem with carbon monoxide, but everyone soon returned to their apartments. Police say Rowley-Hutt got locked out and couldn't get back in.
The owners of the complex said in a statement that when Rowley-Hutt went outside, she was wearing winter clothing. They said their security cameras showed she fainted at some point after exiting.
The coroner's office is investigating. The province's seniors minister says she will take action if it's warranted.
If we have to change something in the future to make sure people are living in more security, we will do it.
Rowley-Hutt was the mother of former Bloc Québécois leader Gilles Duceppe. His political colleagues offered sympathy and support.
Learning about it now, my condolences go out to Mr. Duceppe and his entire family.
It's very difficult for Gilles. I speak with him today, and it's very, very difficult for him and for all the family.
The private complex is home to more than 600 seniors. Most of them are autonomous, and for that reason, the seniors ministry says a head count isn't mandatory after an evacuation. The facility says it is fully cooperating with the investigation. Alison Northcott, CBC News, Montreal.
Quebec's coroner's office says 121 people died from exposure to extreme cold between 2010 and 2016. 31 were elderly, meaning over the age of 75. And there are more concerns about exposure in other parts of Canada tonight. Extreme cold is gripping parts of Ontario and Quebec, and Atlantic Canada is still dealing with the aftermath of that nasty winter storm.
There's a big layer of crust of pretty thick ice from some freezing rain that fell last night, and then underneath that, the first snow that fell yesterday also looks quite fluffy.
In New Brunswick, people have been digging out all day, and crews are working around the clock to keep the streets clear.
I would compare it to trying to plow salt, really.
Some areas saw more than 30 centimeters of snow. Others, a treacherous mix of snow, ice pellets, and freezing rain that caused flash flooding in Moncton and St. John.
I'm just working as best I can to find the storm drain so that our swimming pool in the street drains.
And then there's the extreme cold. Temperatures here in Ottawa could feel like minus 35 tonight. For many, that means staying indoors or bundling up.
Under the heavy coat is a few other layers.
But for others, it's a matter of life or death.
I don't like to be out here. I just don't have any choice if I want to eat.
The big worry, of course, is frostbite, which can happen in just 10 minutes. Toronto's mayor says shelters were nearly full last night, and outreach workers are trying to convince more people on the streets to seek refuge indoors. The good news is the end is in sight. Why, it's a balmy -11 in my hometown of Winnipeg right now. Southern Ontario should warm up tomorrow.
The RCMP is going through a kind of slow-motion Me Too moment, dealing with thousands of claims of sexual harassment in a class action lawsuit and getting a new civilian watchdog. But amid all that, the RCMP now faces allegations it covered up sexual assaults. A CBC News investigation reveals that years ago, 3 female RCMP employees came forward about a doctor who examined them when they were new recruits. They brought allegations to their bosses, local police, and regulators. But nothing happened. Now the women are coming forward once again, along with dozens of others. And Dave Seglins has their stories and a warning here. The details of the allegations are disturbing.
Hello.
I'm pounding.
Are you?
Yes.
Look at Vicky.
A reunion, bittersweet.
30 years later.
We're going to do this together.
Yes. They're meeting to expose a secret.
I had all the paperwork saved.
About the mandatory medical exams they had when they each first joined the RCMP.
He starts to pull at my nipples, and I asked, why are you doing that?
So he had me spread my legs, and he didn't have any gloves in his hands, checks around, and he keeps calling it a peek. I'm taking a peek.
This is what the RCMP says you have to do to be employed. It was a specific answer over and over again.
These 3 women are still haunted, still angry about what happened. It was 1989. Helen Henderson, Vicky Gravel, Sylvie Corriveau. They were young, newly hired at the RCMP's Toronto Airport Detachment. They got to talking about the RCMP doctor, John A. McDougall, and the breast and vaginal exams he did. They decided to report him.
I felt that we're going to be able to get this guy. I've got 2 other people saying they had similar things happen to them. How could this not? This is a sure win. We're going to get him kicked out.
You reported it to the RCMP, you reported it to the Toronto Police, and the College of Physicians and Surgeons. So, what happened?
Nothing. Nothing.
The paper trail in this case is troubling. The RCMP quickly stepped in and told the women no grounds existed to lay criminal charges. 1 month later, senior brass closed the file, but not before sending out a memo to all doctors within the force spelling out rules for proper breast examinations and directing them gynecological exams will not be done by health services officers. Now, the College of Physicians and Surgeons also investigated. McDougall told them he was teaching breast self-examination technique. He was silent on the other complaints. I am deeply disappointed that the applicants, subject of this investigation, have felt in any way mistreated, he wrote. The college canceled a disciplinary hearing. Now, according to these internal records, the prosecutor says the women backed down, were afraid to testify. The women tell us that's just not true. Well, either way, McDougall kept his license for another decade.
I blame everyone, Toronto Police, the RCMP, and the College of Physicians. Their lack of action, resulted in more females being sexually assaulted. They could have stopped this, and they failed to do so.
A year ago, Toronto Police reopened their investigation. 30 complainants have come forward. Yeah, this looks like it, I think. Now, John McDougall is in his mid-80s. He lives at this retirement residence just west of Toronto. We're going to go in and see if we can speak to him about these allegations.
Can I help you?
Yes, I'm here to see John McDougall.
Okay.
Is he here?
I can't give any information about anybody.
McDougall's lawyer later told us he is frail, in round-the-clock care, and is suffering dementia. His family declined to comment.
I want justice. I want him to be charged. We've lived with this for so long, and we've had to put it on the back burner. We never thought we would be here today, but for whatever has happened with the Me Too movement, it's time.
So, Dave, you know, you hear in there them talking about justice, and you hear that often that people want it, but it's hard to know what justice looks like. So in their case, walk us through what that means.
Well, for some, they want him to be confronted. Whether he will know, given his state of health, what he's being confronted with is a big question. Whether he'll ever face charges is a huge question. But for some of the women we spoke to, the RCMP, they really want the RCMP held accountable. For them, it's being heard, it's being acknowledged, the RCMP acknowledging what happened to them. They had hoped they would get some justice through the class action lawsuit that we've heard about over the years. But because some of them were recruits when they were examined, they weren't technically employees. So they've been disqualified from compensation. That's why they're launching a new lawsuit.
Okay, Dave Seglins, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Now, the Public Safety Minister, Ralph Goodale, wouldn't comment on these women's allegations, but he said cases like theirs underscore the need for change.
That is why we have pursued the modernization agenda that we have so vigorously. You see that reflected in the mandate letter to the Commissioner, in the selection of the Commissioner herself, and in the governance changes that we announced a week ago. All of that is aimed toward remedying this situation and making sure that the corner is thoroughly and soundly turned.
And Goodale added that there will be more announcements in the coming weeks on changes to the RCMP's harassment procedure.
To a developing story in British Columbia now, where questions have been swirling since late last year when two top officials in the BC Legislature became subjects of a criminal investigation. But the reason why was kept secret until today. Renee Filipponi has details from an explosive report that has just been made public. Among the allegations, unnecessary overseas trips, padded expense accounts, and questionable cash payouts.
2 months ago today, Clerk Craig James and Sergeant-at-Arms Gary Lenz were escorted out of the legislature.
Okay.
They were suspended and put under criminal investigation. The pair claimed it came as a surprise.
I know I've done nothing wrong. It's not an issue of anything that I've done that's going to be coming out.
No details were made public. Speaker Darryl Plecas, who launched the investigation, was criticized. Today, his office is hoping for vindication.
For the last 2 months, the Speaker and I have been called into question. It's been questioned our motives. Our motives is simply this: to look after and protect the British Columbian taxpayer.
The allegations include luxurious trips overseas under questionable rationales, with tens of thousands in personal expenses being billed to the legislature. Part of the report references a $3,200 wood splitter that, quote, never arrived at the Legislative Assembly and instead was taken directly to Mr. James' personal residence. And among other things, allegations that a truckload of alcohol may have been misappropriated.
It's very concerning what we see in terms of the allegations around expenditures. I'm also, though, concerned with respect to the sign-off on those expenditures.
Those concerns are shared by the BC NDP.
What we saw out of these two offices is expenses that the general public would just shake their head at disbelief.
Well, there's some serious allegations here, and what are we hearing from James and Lenz?
Well, late today, Ian, the pair issued a statement saying they're shocked that the Speaker would release a report containing such damning and, in their words, unsubstantiated and hearsay allegations. Now, the pair say those allegations have never been shared with them and they never had an opportunity to respond. And they go on to state yet again that the claims are false and untrue. In the meantime, a special prosecutor appointed by the province is conducting its own investigation. Ian?
All right, Renee, thank you.
Turning now to a tough issue this country's been wrestling with for a long time, the struggle to provide adequate long-term care for seniors. It's not just about space and money. There are growing threats to seniors' personal safety in long-term care homes, with increasing cases of dementia, come rising levels of violence amongst residents, between residents, even homicide. David Common explores this disturbing trend.
In life, Keith Wood was full of adventure, a naval veteran with a flair for fun. It all ended with a gash across his head, a blood clot in his brain, the result of an unprovoked attack inside the home intended to care for him.
I whispered into his ear, "Parting is such sweet sorrow. I'll be here in the morning if you're still here. If you're not, I'll understand. And I was home about an hour when they called to say he died.
His wife and caregiver says she soon learned the man who attacked Keith, a resident with a history of violence, was charged with manslaughter. The unpredictable and sometimes aggressive effects of dementia are seen as a key reason behind the escalating violence. They were evident in this case CBC reported last year when a resident hurled a chair at Meyer Sadoway. The attack continued, and Meyer would later die. At least 29 deaths in Ontario homes over 6 years have been deemed a homicide.
There is a total consensus that there is a critical situation in long-term care in which the acuity of the residents is extremely high, the care levels are too low, and the violence levels have really just skyrocketed.
Resident-on-resident violence surged 105% between 2011 and 2016. Ontario's coroner has repeatedly warned the issue of resident-on-resident violence is an urgent and persistent issue. Those who live in the homes are arriving later in life, living longer, and more often with dementia, which can produce aggressive, unpredictable behaviors. Yet a new report from the Ontario Health Coalition says staffing levels are decreasing relative to the growing needs of our parents and grandparents in the homes.
Okay, David, what are Ontario health officials saying about this?
Nothing. They wouldn't talk about the homicides being discussed today. We do know, though, that some homes are trying to address dementia in different ways, even with architecture, changing it so that those with dementia who wander aren't stuck up against a wall, essentially. That reduces some of the aggression. It's shown to be promising. But at the end of the day, this report and many others before it have pointed to staffing, the lack of staffing in particular. 62% of the aggressive incidents, according to one study, have been unwitnessed by staff. Now, staff can't be everywhere all the time, but when they aren't there, bad stuff can happen.
Okay, David, thank you for this. Appreciate it.
Here are some of the other developing stories that we're following tonight. A Thunder Bay man will stand trial for second-degree murder for killing an Indigenous woman. Braden Bushby is the man in the center here, accused of throwing a metal trailer hitch from a moving car that hit Barbara Kentner. It happened in January 2017, and she died several months later from her injuries. The judge today said there was enough evidence presented in the preliminary hearing to send the case to trial. The founder of Canadian beauty brand Decium has died. The company confirmed that 40-year-old Brandon Truax passed away over the weekend. Truax has had a strained relationship with the brand after abruptly closing its roughly 30 stores. Following 2 court proceedings last year, he was removed as the company's CEO in order to stay away from Decium stores and employees.
Still ahead on the National, while Theresa May unveils Plan B for Brexit, we take you to a town overwhelmingly in favor of leaving.
Plus, how much is a good night's sleep worth? Tonight we begin an in-depth series with new science showing how getting your rest can boost your brain power.
I'll give you $1 million for a good night's sleep, Ian. And would you do anything for love? How about this?
She wanted a coffee and I'd do anything for her. So I said, you know what, I can't get up there with the car. I said, I'll skate up enough to get them. And so that's what I did.
The country's greatest love story in our moment.
Brexit tells us that emotionally we're in a broken home.
Since the referendum, we have been living in a state of constant fear.
There are some anxious people in London lately, British and European, sharing their concerns about the UK leaving the EU. Plenty of anxiety, too, in the British Parliament after that stunning rejection of Theresa May's original divorce deal. Well, today the Prime Minister pitched her revised Brexit proposal.
Following last week's vote, it is clear that the government's approach had to change. I've listened to colleagues across Parliament from different parties and with different views.
So May says her new plan, Plan B, makes the negotiating relationship with the EU more flexible. She pitched it as having more protections for workers' rights and the environment. She also made it clear there cannot be a physical, so-called hard border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic. No surprise, but these proposals did not impress opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn, who says Plan B looks far too much like Plan A.
What makes her think that what she tried to renegotiate in December will succeed in January? Mr. Speaker, this really does feel a bit like Groundhog Day.
Both claim that if Brexit is to happen, they'd rather there be a deal. But what kind of deal? They're not there yet, and time is ticking. In fact, there's just 2 months until that's actually supposed to happen. Understandable then why so many people are preoccupied, especially those who want out of the EU. So Thomas Degla took a trip to a city that voted overwhelmingly to leave to ask, how do you feel about that now?
Whoever thought breaking up would be this complicated? Certainly no one here in Stoke-on-Trent, nicknamed Britain's Brexit capital. Nearly 7 in 10 voters in this city chose leave, and there's no sign of a change of heart now.
We've got nothing to look forward to. So in my opinion, we were better out.
At the pub, there's no talk of that pesky backstop or complicated customs arrangements. No, all they want is to get on with Brexit.
There will not be a deal, and there's nothing to fear in that, though.
I think leaving without a deal is better than not leaving.
Brexit was this gritty city's gut reaction to decades of misfortune, a reflection of Britain's industries changing, fears of immigration, and a feeling that places like this have been left behind.
We voted to come out, and yet why should it take so long?
For centuries, Stoke has been known as England's hub for ceramics and pottery. A local industry once employing 100,000 now has just 7,000 workers. The prestigious Royal Dalton brand packed up long ago, leaving this eyesore behind. Stoke's most famous industry may be smaller now, but it's still mighty. Moreland Pottery makes 1,000 mugs a week by hand. A rare breed, John Plant has stayed in this business for 30 years. Rarer still, he voted against Brexit.
We've been duped. I think we've been lied to, and people have believed those lies.
There's a growing suspicion here Brexit could be delayed or even cancelled outright, with Stoke feeling left behind once more.
How will it affect you?
Local MP Gareth Snell hears it from his constituents all the time.
So there's a frustration, again, that politics isn't working, and if we're not careful, we've had far-right activity here before, and unfortunately we are creating the sorts of vacuums that they can easily fill.
At the pub and across the city, they're saying this deadlock is not what they voted for. Brexit has so far missed the mark. Thomas Dagg, CBC News, Stoke-on-Trent, England.
Still ahead on The National, Canada versus Norway, the war over a giant fake moose.
But first, we begin our in-depth series on sleep. Duncan McHugh turns from reporter to research subject as he finds out exactly how much a good night's sleep can change your brain.
All right, Duncan, we're going to get started with the task now. The tower of discs that you see on the left, you're going to want to move those all the way to the right.
Over the next few days, we'll be going in depth into a crucial and increasingly scarce resource, one we all adore, that's sleep. We spend about a third of our lives sleeping, or at least we should be. Each time researchers check, Canadians seem to be sleeping less. Back in 2005, Canadians averaged about 8 hours of sleep a night. By 2013, that had dropped to 7. Now about 40% of Canadians are dealing with some kind of sleep disorder. 3.3 million of us live with out-and-out insomnia. Something about sleep keeps our bodies and minds from just falling apart. The lack of it has been linked to obesity, heart disease, stroke, diabetes, and depression. And as Duncan McHugh explores in tonight's story, it has a dramatic effect on memory.
If you want a crash course in what's really going on with your brain when you sleep, follow this guy.
There's so little known compared to other areas of science and neuroscience in particular. It's about the mystery of sleep. Here, so you can see the fluid is the brightest.
Right. Stuart Fogel is a psychology professor and the director of sleep neuroscience at the Royal Ottawa's Institute of Mental Health Research. And I'm getting a front row seat in one of the few places in the world that actually records what happens in the brain during sleep.
Being able to leverage new technologies, draw back the curtains and peer inside to see what's happening in the brain while we're sleeping is just fascinating.
All right, come on in, Duncan. Yep.
This is how it begins, my journey into the world of sleep, to understand why we can't do without it.
60% of Canadians don't get the sleep that they need or the sleep that they want. It's quite a big number. Yeah.
That's a huge number. That over half of us are not getting as much sleep as we want.
That's right.
Fogel is halfway through a 4-year research project uncovering connections between sleep and memory.
And a lot of what sleep is good for has to do with memory. People are really gaining a lot of interest in this because there seems to be so much about sleep. The more we do study this, the more we find how there's just so many aspects of sleep that are involved in memory processing.
Okay. Just have you close your eyes for me.
To show me why sleep is so critical to how we learn, I'm not actually going to sleep.
All right, Duncan, we're going to get started with the task now. We're going to be
not right away. First, a skill test.
The tower of discs that you see on the left, that you're going to want to move those all the way to the right, but you can only move...
Using my fingers on this keypad, I have to move those colored blocks from left to right. All of it captured by this $10 million MRI machine.
So he's nearly got the whole strategy figured out, not in an optimal sense.
These images show different parts of the brain activating while it struggles to learn the task. The same kind of brain activity occurs during sleep, and to Fogel, that's a crucial discovery.
What we see is with a period of sleep that people just arrive at this aha moment where they've arrived at the solution, the optimal solution to the puzzle that they couldn't necessarily get to before they had sleep.
That's it, you're all done.
All right. It's a motor skill thing too. The third finger is like, come on. Work.
So does that mean the more sleep you get, the better your memory? Well, to a point, and as Fogel has learned, up to a certain age. To better understand how memory and sleep change as we age, we recruited 60-year-old Tom Patterson. He's my fellow lab rat in the sleep lab tonight. Well, Fogel runs us through more tests.
Hi, Tom Patterson.
Hi, Tom. Stuart Fogel.
Tom is what scientists describe as an optimal aging adult.
Super.
So this is someone that is really healthy and in sort of ticks all the boxes for the different measurements that we use. They're physically active. They aren't on any medications. They have no sleep complaints.
Tom fits the bill on all fronts, and most importantly, he shows no early warning signs of dementia.
How much are you hearing older people say that they're worried about premature dementia or memory loss?
Almost every subject who enrolls in the study, I would say.
I certainly think about it now because I'm 60, and I think about that kind of thing. Oh, Jesus, I wonder if my memory's getting worse. Why did I go to the garage? You remember halfway back to the house, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Fridge moments. Opening up the fridge. What's in there?
Yeah.
Just standing there.
Exactly.
I don't know what I was looking for. Yeah.
They pick up the electrical activity that's just naturally going on in your brain.
Then, time to get wired up. These electrodes will document our brain waves throughout the night.
What time do you normally go to bed?
We've also enlisted 23-year-old doctoral student Nick Vanderberg to show how differently a young brain deals with memory and sleep.
When you see the green cross, that means to practice. So 4-1-3-2-4, 4-1-3-2-4, as quickly and as accurately as possible.
Okay, time for another motor skills test. And it ain't easy.
That's all right. I'll have you hold on to this side. Perfect.
A few more wires to hook up because I didn't look Frankenstein-y enough. And then finally, time for bed.
It should be really easy to sleep tonight. Good.
Duncan, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So you're just gonna make yourself comfortable in the bed and you're off to sleep for the night?
Okay.
All right, good night. Okay, that's everybody.
Good morning. How did you sleep?
Bright and early, we get another go at finger tapping to see if we learned anything as we slept.
What was it like to do it this morning?
It seemed it was quicker initially.
I totally felt like I was faster this morning.
You felt it, eh?
Oh, I could feel it the first couple of goes, but then it started to slow down, and I think it had more to, it felt to me like it was just because it was morning. I was like, oh, brain not working. But I could, yeah, needed coffee.
Before we find out if we were, in fact, any faster.
All right, Duncan, so we're going to go through the results of your test, your overnight recording.
Stuart Fogel takes a moment to decipher my brainwaves. He's looking for something called sleep spindles. Spindles are evidence our brain is shifting tasks we learn every day from short-term memory to long-term.
What we can see here, now that you're fully asleep, is some nice sleep spindles, these bursts of activity, a very large amplitude, nice long duration sleep spindle there. Other ones here as well. So your brain is really working hard there.
I'm so happy I have good sleep spindles. But so what's my brain doing when I have a sleep spindle?
That indicates that you're probably reprocessing that information, reactivating those memory traces, integrating them into long-term memory stores.
Overnight, my spindles were on overdrive, which means I was probably practicing the test without being aware of it. How did I compare to Tom and Nick? Time to find out. We're about to see who was actually better at the motor skills / memory task after we slept.
And so what you see here is what we would have predicted.
On this graph, a lower bar means a faster performance.
Nick, who's our younger subject, has the benefit from sleep. So
Nick's got speed fingers.
So he got a lot faster here. Yeah, that's quite a good improvement in terms of speed. The blue is the training session, so that was the evening when you were learning it for the first time, and then the red bars are the retest, so that's the morning session where we want to see how well you did after a night of sleep. What we see here is very typical in a younger subject like Nick, where they start off at a certain level there, and then they improve after a night of sleep. Duncan, we see a similar sort of thing here. You're a little bit slower overall, but you do still get a little boost from sleep.
That's the eureka moment. A good night's sleep boosts your brain power.
So the boost is really what you're honing in on to show us how important the sleep is.
Yeah, that's right.
Because if we're not getting the sleep, then that boost is really important.
That boost doesn't happen. That boost only happens with sleep. He's learning the task just.
But for Tom, as expected, there was no boost at all.
Is that as we get older, we don't derive the same benefit from sleep. So Tom doesn't have that boost after sleep, that improvement from at retest that sleep seems to afford.
It's showing me that I'm getting older and I'm right where my age group should be, and I'm not. It's not bad or a critical memory loss. It's just indicative of my age.
Our sleep patterns undoubtedly change as we age, but Fogel hopes if we improve our sleep, it will help treat, maybe even ward off, dementia.
The moral of the story would be to do everything you can to make sleep a priority, and to eliminate the things that are going to interfere with sleep, because sleep definitely can stand to provide a benefit, and perhaps even stave off things like dementia. I wouldn't necessarily call it the fountain of youth, but I think there's something to be said about its ability to keep our brains healthy as we age.
Okay, so Duncan, I'm glad you did well on the test, but I confess I'm a bit more curious about Tom, because You know, he presumably had a good night's sleep. He's healthy, and yet there was sort of a flat line on the memory. What are we to take from that?
Yeah, and Tom is the best case scenario for an aging adult, which shows, you know, his low performance shows how much sleep impacts memory, and it sets a bar for people in terms of when that early memory loss starts, which will help scientists hopefully predict younger subjects when they might be at risk for something serious memory loss like dementia, and maybe sleep might be the way to help treat it.
Okay, tomorrow we're looking at sleep apnea, right?
Apnea. And apnea, that's when you stop actually breathing in the middle of the sleep. That can happen a couple times a night. It can happen hundreds of times a night. And it has serious health impacts, obviously, and many Canadians don't know they have it. So we followed another 3 people through another sleep test, but this one was at home. That presents a few challenges, and take a peek at this.
So, off they go to give it a try. At home, it's tricky business getting the gizmos all set up, but everyone finally gets the hang of it.
Okay, these are good sports, letting you lurk in their homes all night long. Looking forward to that tomorrow. We're going to learn something.
I'm looking forward to going home and getting a bit of sleep tonight. What about you?
Yes, please. See you later.
Thanks.
I'm anxious about sleeping now. Still ahead, our moment of the day. The surprisingly romantic story behind the best video on the internet today. But first, in case you missed it, Canada is upping its game in a very specific struggle against a certain Scandinavian constitutional monarchy that couldn't just leave well enough alone.
There are things that you just don't do to Canadians. You don't water down our beer, and you don't tell us we can't put maple syrup on our pancakes, and you don't mess with Mac the Moose, or you're going to get the antlers.
This shiny interloper is what Mayor Fraser told me is so fired up about. Norway's Storelgen, standing 10.3 meters tall, it officially took on the title of world's largest moose statue when it was erected just over 3 years ago, dethroning Moose Jaw's famous Mac the Moose. But now, Canada is gearing up to wrestle back the crown from this mockery of our moosehood, this giant chrome gauntlet slapping the face of an entire nation. All thanks to a couple of proud Saskatchewan boys and their spirited GoFundMe campaign.
Dear people of Moose Jaw, an egregious offense has been committed against you by the people of Norway. Put 31 centimeters back on Mac and stick it to Oslo.
And for just how we could take back that title, well, different people have different ideas.
I'd say a hockey stick resting on the horns.
I kind of like the idea of putting skates on the moose.
A hat on top, I guess.
We could just take that one out and donate it somewhere and just build a nice brand new one.
Whoa, whoa, whoa! Mac the Moose has stood for almost 35 years, lady. Build a new one, she says? Anyway, what does Mayor Tolmie think?
I'm kind of leaning towards the bigger rack. I think the present rack is a nice one, but I think a more proportional rack would be the solution, personally.
Your move, Norway, your move.
Here's some of the other stories we're watching tonight. Members of the Venezuelan National Guard have been arrested for allegedly plotting against the president. The officers demanding President Nicolas Maduro leave power and apparently seized weapons from a National Guard command post. It triggered violent protests just a few kilometers from the presidential palace. Living conditions in Venezuela are deteriorating with frequent power outages, inflation, food and medicine shortages. Opposition leaders are calling for nationwide demonstrations on Wednesday. In the Kerch Strait near Crimea, at least 10 people have died after 2 ships under the Tanzanian flag caught fire. Some of the crew were able to jump into the water to escape the flames. About a dozen crew members have been rescued, with recovery operations still underway for the remaining crew. It's believed an explosion occurred on one of the vessels and the fire spread to the other. And for the second time in less than a week, a suicide bomber has targeted U.S. troops in Syria. A car bomb went off this morning near a checkpoint in the north. No Americans were killed, but there are reports of casualties among allied Kurdish forces. The attack follows another last Wednesday that killed 4 Americans, 5 Kurds, and several militiamen. ISIS has claimed responsibility.
The efforts to get China to release 2 Canadians is ramping up exactly 5 weeks after they were detained in what has become a heated diplomatic showdown with no clear resolution. And today, the international community sent a message directly to the Chinese president. The strategy has put Ottawa in Beijing's crosshairs. But as Katie Simpson explains, the Trudeau government says it is making progress.
China is urging Canada to stop the international campaign to rally its allies. A foreign affairs spokeswoman says Canada is putting on an empty show of strength. In Ottawa, it's seen as a sign the campaign may be working.
More and more countries coming forward to indicate that they share Canada's view, and they're offering that indeed it does.
Between the Prime Minister and Foreign Affairs Minister, there have been 19 high-level discussions with world leaders and top officials. Those efforts have led to 11 public statements denouncing China's actions. Today, 140 former diplomats and academics from around the world also wrote an open letter calling for China to release the 2 detained Canadians.
We'll always stand up for the rule of law, and we will always encourage friends, allies, and thoughtful people around the world to point out that Canada stands up for the rule of law.
But one conversation Justin Trudeau has avoided so far is a direct call with Chinese President Xi Jinping.
If this issue is going to be resolved, it's imperative that the Prime Minister step up to the plate.
Sources tell CBC News if the timing is wrong on a call to Xi, it could limit Canada's options going forward, and that it may end up inflaming tensions further. Beijing has demanded the release of Meng Wanzhou, the Huawei CFO arrested on an extradition request from the U.S. American authorities have 9 days left to submit the paperwork to formally move the process to the next phase.
I couldn't imagine the circumstances that one could explain not being able to provide the materials within 60 days, in particular on such a high-profile case.
The editor of a Chinese state-linked newspaper is encouraging the Americans to miss the deadline, let Meng go, and blame the whole thing on the U.S. government shutdown. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Ottawa.
Up next on The National, our moment. His fiancée wanted coffee, but the roads were sheer ice, so he found another, more creative way.
And I just like to see people smile. You know, it's Canadian. You get out here, we're growing up on the ice. You can skate up and down the street and literally go get a coffee. I mean, that's the best thing in the world. Best thing I've ever done.
Why do you even have online reviews? Well, you're not really a modern business without them. There's probably a whole bunch of them out there for Kim's. Here we go. Kim's Convenience. Wow, 4 stars. Love this place. And that Mr. Kim is a real cutie pie.
Cutie pie? Oh no. Hope you don't get jealous.
Why? He's crazy or ugly.
Why you say like that?
Because everyone who writes online is crazy or ugly.
We're gonna die!
Most of them have already been exposed.
We don't know that you have it.
I don't want you feeling sorry for me.
If you want me out, you'll have to fire me.
The issue here is safety, not money, isn't it?
Unspeakable. New episode Wednesday on CBC.
Between the extreme cold, the snow and ice hitting much of eastern Canada over the last 24 hours, it's hard not to let winter get the best of you. And it's only January. But that's not how Corey Hamilton sees it. He didn't let a very frozen New Brunswick street stand in his way today. All he needed was a pair of skates. How he made the most out of a nasty storm is our moment.
Everything was ice. I stepped outside, seen it. I'm like, yeah, I'm getting my skates on. And I went up here to the hill. I went up to the top. It's 2 rows, and I did a little slalom action there, back and forth, just kind of testing the ice. I decided, you know what, I'm going to take it one step further and do a little more Canadian, I guess, if you can, than that. And I'm going to go to Tim Hortons.
Yeah, can I get
A medium double half hot chocolate.
So, and they got a good laugh at Tim Hortons. I mean, how many times are you gonna see a guy come through with a pair of power hockey skates on?
And just two small hot chocolates, and all of them double cupped and on tray, please, because I'm on skates. Coffee, babe?
She wanted a coffee, and I'd do anything for her. It's the most Canadian thing I've ever done, by far. And if you can beat that and get more Canadian, I would like to see it.
I was just thinking, I love how the anchor in Vancouver, where it's 4 degrees, did this moment. It's very fun. Anyway, Corey said that he made a bet with his son that he could go down the skate without the hill, go down the hill without falling. And if he did that, his son had to give up playing Fortnite for the rest of the day. So he won that bet.
Very unhappy child, I'm sure. But also, you know, you heard Corey say there it's the most Canadian thing he's ever done. He's pretty proud of himself right now because he has now challenged Sidney Crosby to a race for Tim's. So if you're listening, Sid the Kid, there's a contender waiting for you.
And now to loop back to something that Rosemary said just a moment ago, you guys are really good on social media, have many more followers than I do. I almost tweeted out a picture today on my walk to work of people a block away from my home playing tennis outside. Good idea that I didn't tweet that, do you think?
No,
so
I was there
like
last week, and I was considering not letting you return.
Yeah, it was nice, but I certainly feel, especially for the people back home in New Brunswick, what a great moment we had. That is the National for January 21st. Good night.
Good night. Night.